So let's take a look at a couple of the images that were the result of what happened at places like Carlisle. On the left, of course, you've got the traditional before picture. So this is what the kids would have looked like coming into the school. The one in the middle actually looks a little bit like Ohayesa, the actor of the young boy in the film that you're going to be seeing. And then here's that same family after they've gone through the assimilation process. You can see again that their hair has been cut, that they've shed their traditional clothing and adopted more Western style, American style clothing. I mean, you can see even that their skin tone and that their facial features appear different. And a lot of that is that they kept them inside, and that actually lightened their skin tone. Another famous image of the tribal Indian and the assimilated Indian looks a little bit like the adult Charles Eastman that you'll see in the film. And so this actually opens up or leads to another policy. We talked about reservations as a way to get Native Americans onto certain areas of land that the federal government could regulate and monitor. Now we're going to take those reservations and we're going to cut them up into smaller plots of land in something called the Dawes Severalty Act, or the General Allotment Act of 1887. And so now we're going to take large reservations that have been given to tribes and we're going to divide them into plots given to individual Indian families. And so it's kind of, we're working from they're nomadic and they're on the plains. We've contained them into a reservation. Now we're going to contain them on an even smaller piece of individual land. And the deal that was made was that after 25 years of working the land, if you had converted to Christianity, if you had shed your native ways, you could qualify for full U.S. citizenship and full title to the land, and it would be your land. You wouldn't have to pay anything for it. It would be yours to keep forever and pass down to your children and grandchildren. Any reservation land that was unused or that the tribes didn't want to settle would then be sold to the federal government from the Indian tribes, and then so they'd get some money, but in exchange the federal government would then turn around and either sell it or give it to white homesteaders. And what typically happened was that the white settlers got the better parts of the reservation land, and the Native Americans ended up getting the worst parts, the drier parts or the hilly parts, or the parts that wouldn't be as useful for farming. And then any other proceeds from the sale of these lands would be put into a trust fund that was supposed to pay for supplies and services for the tribes in the future. Like everything else in government, inefficiency and waste and fraud often is an issue here. And so kind of in a similar way to the Freedmen's Bureau, which never really was successful in helping African Americans transition to freedom. These trust funds that were put together from the Dawes Plan, or the Dawes Act, never really fully panned out, and a lot of the promises that were made to these tribes never were kept. You're going to see Dawes featured prominently in the film. He talks to the tribal chiefs and to the settlers on the reservations directly. He's basically like the mentor to Charles Eastman. And Eastman has a lot to thank Dawes for in terms of his status, but at the same time, he blames Dawes for a lot of the issues that he deals with later in his life. So Dawes is a very conflicting or confounding figure to Charles Eastman, and you'll see him in the movie prominently. I actually believe that Dawes wanted to save the Indians. I think that his heart was in the right place, but in the end, it was kind of his way or the highway, and so he wasn't all that sympathetic to Native Americans who didn't want to go along with the plan. Okay, so that's the end of the slideshow and of the notes that I have for you. There's just one last thing I wanted to mention quickly. You're going to see in the film, and that's the ghost dancing movement. If you go to the end of your notes, you'll see a section on this. So the ghost dance movement was actually a Native American religious movement that was the last chance for many of these tribes to try to resist the domination of the federal government and to keep whites away from their lands. It was sort of almost a superstitious type of activity that they thought was going to bring about a prophet that was going to kill off the white man in some great plague, and that somehow the Native American tribes were going to be saved. And so Some of them believed in it wholeheartedly. Others just went along with it because that's what everyone else was doing. You're going to see a very key point in the film that Charles Eastman is going to go down and see them ghost dancing, and he's going to kind of question what their motives are and why they're doing it, and criticize it a bit. But there was basically white paranoia. I mean, they thought that the tribes were casting some sort of a curse on the white man, and so the ghost dance really wasn't a huge threat to them, but they saw it as threatening, and so the troops tried to put it down, and this is really what leads to what's called the Wounded Knee Massacre in 1890, when U.S. troops go in and massacre over 200 Native American men, women, and children. I mean, they didn't discriminate at all. They didn't go after just the people who may have been armed. They went after everyone. And you're going to see that depicted in the final scenes of the film. It's just one of those really horrific events in American history that didn't need to happen, but it did happen. And so it kind of put a violent bookend on the period that was supposed to be a period of peace. When it was originally started by Grant, a lot of these policies, these reservation policies, were designed to bring about less conflict between Native Americans and whites, and in the end it ends up being one of the most violent periods in American history when it comes to conflict between Native Americans and whites. I hope that you enjoy the film, Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee. It's based on a best-selling book by Dee Brown. It's a great film in a lot of ways. I think that you can relate to the characters. I hope that it'll give you a new perspective on the trials and tribulations of Native Americans in this country, and also how government policy was implemented. Please pay close attention and answer your assigned questions, and I look forward to talking to you about the film when we see each other again next week. Thanks.